Now, the federal government has issued a circular directing 7 ministers in the cabinet, the heads of government agencies, ambassadors, as well as other political appointees of the administration interested in elective positions to quit not later than Monday, the 16th of May. In a circular issued by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, President Muhammadu Buhari directed that the affected office holders aspiring to run for various offices in the 2023 general elections should tender their resignation on or before Monday, May 16th. The SGF said for the smooth running of the machinery of government and the country's foreign missions, the affected ministers are to hand over to ministers of state where they exist or to the permanent secretary where there is no minister of state. This comes on the heels of the National Assembly passing an amendment to the Electoral Act 2022 to recognize statutory delegates at primaries, congresses, and conventions of political parties in the country. Now, what effect will this have on the forthcoming party primary elections, and what implications will this have on the candidates themselves? We do have a lot of questions. And for more on this, let's bring in Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Osaro Eghobamien. Thank you for coming on the show. I hope I did not murder your name. You might want to correct me. It's fine.
Eghobamien.
Eghobamien. Thank you so much. And a good place to start it will be from the courts. Yesterday we saw the Court of Appeal here in Abuja make a pronouncement, a judgment on the contentious 8412 of the Electoral Act. I don't know if you've seen a copy of the judgment and what you make of it, or what is in the public domain so far.
I have read the judgment.
Great, great. What do you make of it?
What do I make of the judgment?
Yes.
Okay, the ultimate decision that the lower court lacks the power to deal with the issue in the peculiar circumstance, I would say, is correct. The opinion that was offered appears to me to be suspect. In other words, the Court of Appeal did the right thing, expressed an opinion which will assist the Supreme Court to review the matter. In other words, if the Supreme Court finds that they were wrong on the issue of locus, at least they have the opinion of the Court of Appeal to consider whether it's right or wrong. That opinion, in my view, is suspect. And I'll tell you why. What the opinion simply says is that the Electoral Act, the provision that says that appointed party officials, political officials, as well as public officers, cannot take part in the convention. Neither they cannot offer themselves for election, neither can they vote in that election. Now, that is geared towards the primaries. You have to understand what's happened here. The National Electoral Commission superintends over party primaries.
Yes, it do.
The Constitution deals with the general election and specifies a period where public officers should resign in the event that they want to partake in the election. You don't expect the Constitution to incorporate what happens in the party primaries. That is dealt with by INEC. So we don't see any conflict whatsoever. What the objective of both are similar. In other words, should there be a conflict, what the objective is ensure that the political appointee is focused on his executive assignment and is not conflicted with a political aspiration. Therefore, if one is geared towards the general election and the other is geared towards the primaries, I don't see where the conflict is.
The debate had been that the Constitution provides specifically for public servants. And here are political appointees where we had the controversy. And should they be enjoying the provisions of the Constitution, which says public servants should resign 30 days to the elections? So that's the debate here. Are they public servants? Are political appointees also public servants, and should they enjoy the covers the Constitution provides?
So yes, that is the basis upon which the decision was delivered, was that there's a discrimination against public servants. And I think we have to put this in perspective. There is no discrimination. What has happened is the Constitution says every public servant, right, should retire before the election. The Electoral Act says a public servant should relinquish his position before the primaries. The primary is going to take place much earlier than the elections. The discrimination you talk about relates to political party holders as it relates to the primaries. You would only talk about discrimination if within that community there was a discrimination within them. So I'm a lawyer. You can be discriminated against because you're not allowed to appear in courts. But there's a criteria. If you go to the law school, you will be permitted to appear in court. However, if you went to law school and you were disallowed from appearing in court, then there's a discrimination. So as long as you're a party, you're a public officer, and you're interested in partaking or participating in the primaries, you're caught by that provision. It doesn't discriminate against who. It only relates to party public officers as it relates to the primaries. And if you're interested, then you simply resign. So I don't see where the discrimination is. Look, there are many things in the judgment that no one is talking about.
Yeah, such
and
as?
Let me tell you. At the lower courts, the Court of Appeal said, the appellant, as the PDP, they joined to appeal. When the matter was brought before the lower courts, the Attorney General was the respondent, in other words, the defendant. There's a gentleman who brought the action, and the court has said now that they had no interest in the matter. Now, one of the allegations that were made against the Attorney General is that it was a connivance. In other words, there was no real dispute, and that he connived with the plaintiff, the claimants. That's a very weighty allegation. The second allegation is that the National Assembly that passed the law were deliberately left out from the action. And also the National Electoral Commission, they were both left out from the action.
Yes.
Now, when you think about it deeply, you have the president, who is the chief CEO of the company, of the country.
Yes.
Then you have the National Assembly that's passed the law. And then you have the National Electoral Commission that sponsored it, I guess. The National Electoral Commission, the National Assembly, and the president all seem to be in favor, because it's a matter based on ethics and principle. I'll talk about that shortly. They all seem to be in favor of Section 34, because all Section 34 simply says is you cannot fully be committed to this assignment and you are pursuing a political aspiration that is in conflict with your assignment, kindly withdraw. This is what happens in private institutions. No private institution would allow a CEO to go and run a political party and continue to run the company. The shareholders and the board members will simply tell you to either take a leave of absence or resign. So that's the objective. Now, the three stakeholders I identified, the president, the National Assembly, and the National Electoral Commission, are in support of that principle, backed by Section 34, Section 84. Whose interest is the Attorney General representing? Attorney General should represent the public interest. The public interest is represented by the National Assembly.
Yes.
INEC is protecting us within the context of election. And then the president is obviously the chief executive. So whose interest is he representing? If this was anywhere in the world, anywhere else in the world, he will be hauled before the Bar Council because he seems to be protecting his own private agenda.
Interesting, and thank you for bringing that to the fore. So let's talk about the political appointees. Yesterday, the president issued that directive, and we've seen about 3 of them resign so far. However, there's a party guideline, the APC party guideline. I believe it's Article 3, which directs, party members to resign 30 days before the primaries. As it stands, any minister who hasn't resigned up until now doesn't have 30 days to the conduct of the primaries. In other words, they risk being disqualified. Are you saying that they cannot appeal this because they are bound by the guidelines of their party? Or can they do that as a Nigerian who has, you know, who the Constitution backs to vie for any office of the land, what would be their fate really for the political appointees in the President Muhammad Buhari administration at the moment, who seem to be risking disqualification by their party guidelines, and the president has directed to resign anyways?
All right, as far as the disqualification is concerned, I need to look at that carefully. But let me tell you that the question about whether or not a minister resigns is based more for us on ethics and integrity, predicated on some fundamental principles. You've been appointed as an executive to execute and assign and to prosecute the policies of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You've been appointed by the president. And clearly, you're now pursuing a political aspiration. I would imagine that you don't need a rule to ask you that. At this point, your 100% loyalty cannot, as an executive, be given to that job. And therefore, you ought to resign. You don't need any rule. You don't need any constitution. It's not a constitutional matter. I'm quite pleased that the president took that position, because you could see that many of the cabinet members appear to be distracted from their work. So it's a matter of principle, ethics, integrity, predicated on the principle that I am accountable. You know, leadership is not about empowering. It's not so much about just what you do. It is about service. And therefore, if you're someone who is prone to service, you will resign without being told. So, I mean, whether or not they're disqualified is a different thing. Perhaps it demonstrates and questions the leadership of those who have continued in that. Perhaps.
Okay, I like that. Let's talk about leadership in general terms, beyond political appointees, as Nigerians head to the polls next year. What should we be looking out for?
Thank you for that question. Leadership is a subtle subject, and it's a complex one. For me, I am looking for someone who is inspiring and somebody who is committed to service. So let me explain that, because I do have a preference, so, and I will mention it. I am obviously inspired by the sitting vice president. And I'll tell you why that is so when you talk about service. I came back to Lagos to join the law school. I had, been called in the UK. And after a few years, I started practicing with a partner of mine. And my partner was supposed to go for a board meeting where he met one of the board members, splat on the floor. He was dead, and blood was gushing out of his head, Alaba Joseph. And he called me and said, Osaro, you can't believe what I'm witnessing. Just see Alaba Joseph right on the floor, gushing with blood. And so what happened? He said, I don't know. Anyway, they got a few people together and took him to the morgue. We then had an attorney general then who is in the person of Yemi Osinbajo. I had first met him through a book I'd read, The Law of Evidence. I was very impressed by the book, and I looked at the authors. He was one of them. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. That was the best book I'd read, authored by a Nigerian. And then I thought to myself, I hope one day I'll be able to meet this author. And then he became Attorney General, and I went to report this incident to him.
Attorney General of Lagos State.
Yeah, Lagos State.
Yes. How
he reacted is revealing. He said, what do we do? He got out an old law, the coroner's law. It was 1887 or something. Passed it through the State House of Assembly, set up a coroner's inquest, and we started working together. But something happened on a Friday that really, really impressed me. He called me on a Friday and said, Osaro, do you have all the material? And I said, I will be done tomorrow. And he said, I need it by Sunday. I said, well, I'm traveling to Benin by Sunday. He said, how are you going to Benin? I said, by road. When are you leaving? I said, I'll be leaving at 5:30 in the morning or 5 o'clock. He said, all right, I'll be in my office about 5:45. Why don't you drop it? When he dropped the phone, I want you to imagine what's happened here. This is somebody I never knew. And it was a public officer. I said, you never see public officers like this in Nigeria, at least. And I drove to Alausa, and the gate man said, who are you asking after? I said, the attorney. Oh, he said, he's there alone, go upstairs. And I went upstairs, I knocked, he opened the door himself and took the documents from me and said, have a safe journey. All through my journey to Benin, I kept on thinking about this gentleman. And then I got to my father, who's also a senior advocate. And I told him, you must watch out for a gentleman who's the Attorney General of Lagos. And my father is somebody who I have a lot of respect for. Yeah. He started monitoring his progress. And I'm telling you, he continued to impress us. I am inspired by my father. But my father says, when he sees Yemi Osinbajo, he says, you are my mentor, I'm inspired by you, even though you are younger. My father is late now, so I'll talk about him a lot. So it's about service. Now, these are very little things. The English always say that perfection is a big thing, but small things make perfection. So I need somebody who will take care of the little things around them and then infuse a certain value and philosophy and principle into the system, and hopefully that will begin to permeate downwards.
Okay, so obviously you admire the vice president who is vying to be the next president, but he does have a lot of hurdles before him, even in his own political party. And I mean, it's a crowded race. That's another topic. But is it all about individuals or about institutions? Because we seem to have a problem, you know, around strong men and strong personalities, but very weak institutions. You paint a picture, a very brilliant, beautiful picture of a man committed to service who's at work before 6 a.m. in the morning and does little things. But does the Nigerian system permit the sort of leadership you're talking about?
Very interesting question. Our system produces politicians, doesn't produce leadership or leaders. So what we must do is to ensure that the system actually produces leaders as opposed to just politicians.
How do we do that?
Many more people having the same values getting involved. Not directly, not everybody must run for office. When I speak, people say, why don't you go and try? No, I'm not interested in that. But if I see somebody who exhibits the character and the traits of true leadership, then we must get involved. You see, you're right. The political parties, sometimes it's difficult to tell the ideology. That is correct. And so some of us have not joined any party. But what we've done is to support individuals. We're not politicians, but we understand how politics affects us. You know, so they are intertwined. If you have a strong individual who understands the structural bureaucracies that exist in the country, and that's the problem, they have structural bureaucracies. So you're right in a way. If you appoint anyone today as president of Nigeria and doesn't break down some structural bureaucracies, bring in entrepreneurship into the center, then it might be difficult to actually change the country. So they are intertwined, but you need somebody who understands those bureaucratic inhibitions.
Well, let's talk about your preferred candidates now, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. What do you think his chances are when you look at his political party at the moment? He has about, at the last count, at least 25 other aspirants he has to, you know, struggle with to clinch the ticket of the party. What are his chances?
I will say that, look, his chances are depending on what people like us do. We're not party members, but we're engaging the delegates. And we're saying, look, yes, there's some other candidates there, but what you're going to do, you have a technocrats who drew power from others. For the first time, you're going to have power and technocracy deposited in one man, and then you'll see the difference.
And, I mean, you look at Nigeria currently, the challenges of security, the economy, infrastructure, education, the list is long. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo would be running on the platform of the APC, the current party in power. Do you think, I mean, how easy would that be for him when you have Nigerians? I mean, the discussion in some quarters is that we need a departure from the present. Is that a challenge for him, running on the platform of a current administration faced with this multi-pronged challenges?
I think we have to understand one or two things. He's been given the opportunity to be vice president. If he hadn't been given that opportunity, in all honesty, he'd probably be like me, he probably won't win his election anyway. So he must take advantage of the fact that we have had the opportunity to see what he can do. Yeah. But at the same time, he must be grateful and collectively take responsibility for the areas that have not been, perhaps we're not entirely happy with. We must accept they've done some good things. There are areas that could be improved upon. Yeah. Now, what many of us are saying is that for the first time, you're going to have a good technocrat and somebody who is who's always drawn from other people's power. Yeah. You have power, technocracy settled in one person. So yes, there are difficulties, undoubtedly. Running on the platform of a party, as you rightly said, the institutions are not as strong as we would like them to be. And I think that if you have a strong candidate who understands the inhibitions, then they can begin to build that to a point where all of us can identify just with institutions rather than individuals.
And there have also been conversations in recent times about, you know, the tenure elongation of this administration. We have a senior advocate such as yourself, Chief Robert Clark, who's saying 6 months. We have an Afe Babalola who's saying let's have an interim government in place to fix the country and then hold elections. I wonder what your thoughts are.
I am not sure, and I haven't read the context in which my very good, I call him my uncle, my friend Robert Clark, the context in which he made that statement. But we run a constitutional democracy. There are all sorts of challenges with democracy. But to suggest that we should subvert the entire structure is something that I would be very reluctant to go with. What I would simply say is that the many more people who have the same values, the same philosophy, the same principle, getting into politics will solve this problem. It's going to be difficult, but as I said, look, when you look at somebody from a distance, you can tell whether or not they exhibit excellence.
From a distance?
Yes, from a distance. When you look at somebody, you can tell from the way they speak, from the way they organize the things around them, from the way they project themselves. Now, in Nigeria, there are many other things that determine how we choose our political leaders. If we focus on the right things, integrity, commitment, service, if we focus on those things, spirit of excellence, you will find out that very quickly, many of the things that we talk about will be dealt with, and we don't need a subversion of the constitution to change Nigeria.
We keep our fingers crossed. We're counting days to the primaries of the political parties and, of course, the very crucial election in 2023. But I must thank you very much, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Osaro. Let me leave it at that so I don't murder your other name. But thank you so much for coming on the show. We do appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.